Well, welcome to another episode of the Residential Developer Podcast. I'm the host, Nathan Battishall, and this is our last week of our Mindset Matters series. And so we've been talking about mindset, developing a world-class mindset as a residential developer, investor, someone who's passionate about doing residential development and investment-based projects. And it's something, as I've mentioned over the last few weeks, it's often not talked about, is developing a world-class mindset, having a mindset that enables you to be strong, to be able to move forward, to be able to really enjoy the journey of your development process. And there's so many things I could talk about, but I want to talk about something that I think is very rife and very key in our industry and in this space that I've seen probably the last few years rear its head massively, that separates for me the great investors and developers from maybe the not so great. And a lot of it comes down to owning the outcome. When you are doing a project, it's important for you to take ownership of the outcome of that project. You know, for me, this is why successful developers take leadership and responsibility over their project. And I want to spend a fair bit of time in this episode talking about getting away from a culture of blame, or a culture of blaming, or of blaming different people within the project when things don't go to plan. I've seen this massively over the last few years, probably from COVID onwards, where there's such a culture of blame, and everywhere we go in the industry, whether it be at a consultant or a construction level. It's funny, you can go on a construction site and all of a sudden the builder's blaming the electrician's blaming, the concreter that did the slab, and then there's this blame, and everyone is just trying to avoid taking responsibility, and everyone is trying to avoid taking responsibility of a project. And then you can have a project at a consultant level, and all of a sudden you've got an architect blaming the engineer's blaming council, and then, someone's blaming the certifier, then there's this blame, and then you've got the developer looking for who to blame and who to take out their frustration and their anger on the project onto at either a consultant or a construction level. And you've just got this, all of a sudden people are treading on eggshells, and all of a sudden, instead of towing in the same direction or moving a project forward, I've seen a culture that develops in projects with some developers, or whether it be consultants on that project, where there is literally, rather than advancing a project or moving a project forward, there is an avoidance of responsibility, or there is a fear of being blamed, or a fear of making a mistake, that all of a sudden there's this culture of blame, there's this culture of avoidance of blame, or looking for someone to blame as to why a certain outcome took place. And the reason I talk about this, I actually think it's a culture that needs to shift in our industry. And I think it can shift by having such a large number of investors and developers and builder developers and people passionate about projects across this nation taking ownership and leadership over their projects and over their developments, and changing the culture in which how they carry about those projects. And I think the more people that take ownership and build a culture of ownership and build a culture of leadership and a culture of taking responsibility, that we actually can get away from this blame game. Because I've seen it in my own life, and let's face it, we've all been there. I've even at times where you get put under the spotlight, and the first thing to do is to look at not so much how you can solve a problem for that person or for that client, or even for your own project, how do I solve that problem? Often we're looking at how can we identify who made the mistake so that we can blame them so that we feel better. And although you might have moments of pleasure where you can discover who was to blame for that constraint or that issue or that delay or that mistake or that concern, although you can get some instant gratification, or you can get a little bit of, freedom in actually determining if it wasn't you, then who was it, and then identifying who it was so that you take the heat off yourself, the heat goes on to someone else. The reality is the problem often doesn't get solved. And I just wonder if we shifted the culture in our industry in this space to be more, how can we be problem solvers, and not so much how can we be problem solvers or problem finders, but how can we be solution bringers? You know, I've got something I say often is anyone can bring a problem. Anyone can spot who caused the problem or who made the problem. But what would happen in our industry if everyone had a solution process? Because the reality is, once a problem is a problem, it's there. It's a problem. We all know it. We've all identified it. But what if we actually shifted a mindset and had such a mindset in this space of how can we create a culture of being solution bringers? And I just think as a developer, as an investor, as someone doing projects, you have the opportunity, I have the opportunity to create the culture in which I want my project and direction to head. Understanding, like we've spoken about over the last month, problems will come, mistakes will be made, issues will happen, climates will change, conditions outside of our control will take place, weather can come in, constraints can come in, time delays can come in, financial constraints can take place. All these sort of things can happen. Some could have been avoided, some could not have been avoided. But the reality is, once it's struck, once it's happened, we have to be people who have a solution mindset. We have an opportunity to be solution mindseted, or we can have an opportunity to look to point blame, to look to bury someone into a hole. And I just don't think it moves a project forward. I've seen this so many times where people are blaming one another, trades on site are blaming one another, or consultants are all looking at who to blame, or someone's blaming council. And the problem is, meanwhile, the problem still sits there. The problem still exists. And while we're spending all this energy, all this time, we're depleting our mindset, we're depleting, our creativity, we're depleting our ideas and our forward movement by focusing on something that has already taken place, that's already happened. What would happen if we just brought more of a solution focus to say, let's tow together and we're on the same team, we're pulling in the same direction. This has happened. Yes, we're going to learn from this. We're going to take this on board and let's just push forward. Let's just move forward. Because I think I look at it now. Let's just speak into the Class 2 process, for example. As I said in the previous episode, Class 2 is something I'm sort of wary of. And I think there's so many people treading on eggshells now in that space. And I get it. It's a tricky space. A lot of big mistakes were made, which caused the building commission to have to come in and really clean things up. And a lot of it was important. But I've seen now that there's such a fear of people touching that space, whether it be consultants or builders, even developers now. I'm seeing more and more guys, avoiding that space. I've never seen such a pandemic of, really good sort of higher density sites where people are looking at, instead of 6 apartments or 8 apartments or 10 apartments, I'm just going to do 3 or 4 townhouses, because it's not worth the headache or the stress. And but in that space, we've seen now just a culture of blame, a culture of people treading on eggshells, so afraid to make a mistake. And the moment that something's missed, there's this spotlight on who made the mistake, who's to blame, which consultant, which contractor is to blame. And I think it's depleted a lot of the mindset, I think, of parts of the industry. And look, it's not an easy fix, but I think it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. And I think it's something that depletes the mindset of a lot of people in this industry. And I just think when you're doing your own projects, you have the opportunity to own this process. One thing is, you sign the contract to your development site, so you need to own the process. See, I've seen 2 different types of people steering a project, whether it be a developer or an investor. You've got the one who owns the process. They own the project. They take ownership over the project, and they empower a team around them to carry that out. But they also understand this is their project. This is their outcome. And when things go a little bit south, or when difficulties come, they're not first and foremost looking at who can I blame? Who can I put the finger on? Whereas you've got the other end of the scale where they're doing these projects, they're not taking ownership over it. Maybe they didn't run their numbers appropriately. Maybe they only trusted in one bit of advice. Maybe they didn't do their own homework and they just purely left it to a team who don't own the project. Remember, you signed it, you own it, okay? You signed the contract, so you need to own the result. So the beauty is when you put great people around you, but you, as a leader, you still need to own that project. You take ownership over that project and you take responsibility over that project. So what happens is when something doesn't quite go to plan, you've got a way of how do we come up with a solution? How do we bring a solution? How do we move forward? You know, I always say I try and run or steer clear of a investor or a developer who's, you know, gone through half a dozen builders in the same amount of projects. Like if you've done 6 projects and you've used 6 different builders, well, it's easy to blame the 6 builders, but there's one common denominator. It's you. I've seen that where it just so happens that they've somehow selected 6 bad builders across 6 projects, but it seems to be the builder's problem. Or they've used 6 different architects or 6 different town planners or building designers and, they're chopping and changing the team. And it's not the only reason. The reality is, yes, you can select the wrong players on your team that it doesn't work out, but you've got to ask yourself the question as to, and I've seen this where I just steer right and clear of people that are irresponsible with projects these days, and you don't always get it right, but and I've had to learn the hard way, and the reality is sometimes it doesn't rear its head for a while, but you want to steer clear of people who don't take ownership over their project, because what happens is they don't take responsibility. So all of a sudden it's the agent's fault because they gave them ineffective numbers, or it's the designer's fault because an outcome wasn't met, or it's a builder's fault because it was delayed by a couple of months, and it's always someone else's fault. And what happens is your entire team begin to tread on eggshells and walk on eggshells, and you don't build a positive culture. You don't build an environment where people enjoy being part of that process. Whereas I've seen investors and developers and builder developers who go down the journey of building projects where they build such a great culture and such a great environment of advancement, such a great culture and environment where they've taken ownership over the process. And when a roadblock comes, or when a barrier comes, or a delay or a constraint comes, they take stock, they take leadership, they look at, okay, how do we get through this? How do we work forward from this? And they don't blame, but they push forward. And they look at, okay, if there is severe constraints or issues where someone severely dropped the ball, that's a different story. But often they're little constraints that are outside a lot of people's control, and they look at, okay, with that team is how can we do that better for the project number 2? How can we do that even better for project number 3? How can we do that even better for project number 4? And they grow together, they journey together, they build such a great environment where they're able to go on that destination and journey of actually developing an incredible mindset of ownership, such an incredible mindset of solution bringing, of rather than just, problem pointing or blaming. Blame is one of the biggest things I think that just depletes this industry, is that culture of blame. And look, blame is just simply people not wanting to take responsibility, and also people wanting to get to the place where they feel good because it wasn't them that caused that constraint or that concern. It's always someone else's fault. And it's just a human culture. It's a human nature where we want to blame. We want to blame someone else. But I think it can be something that can be improved in this industry, is developing a culture from the top down, the investor, the project person that owns that development and is doing that development down, of owning the outcome, owning the journey, owning the destination, taking ownership of that space. For me, blame is a business killer. If you want to kill your business, if you want to kill your development, project, if you want to kill your journey and destination of development, the best way to do that is to create a culture of blame. If you want to create a culture of blame, no one will want to go on the journey with you. You will never build camaraderie. You will never build loyalty among people. You will never build longevity with people around you while ever you have a culture and a history of blame. And what will happen, I always say the development industry is actually, it's a closer knit family than people realize. And when you don't take responsibility in your projects and you build a culture of blame, you get to the point where people do not want to work with you. And that's a sad place to be. And sadly, I do see people in that space where they literally are, they get to the point where they've got no one left to work with, or they're working with incompetent and incapable people who are desperate for the work because no one else reputable wants to work with them, due to a culture of blame, due to a culture of not taking action, not taking leadership, not taking responsibility, and blaming other people as to why a project did not work. And it's the fastest way to kill your business. It's the fastest way to kill relationships. But for me, ownership builds profit. When you take ownership over the journey, when you take ownership over an outcome, you begin to build profit. You know, I've been talking a lot in the last few episodes around that book I read of Harry Triguboff's. You know, I love hearing some of his stories about the longevity he's been able to build with some of his contractors and some of his key people, because what he did, he's built a culture of taking ownership, you know, having solutions, moving forward, coming up with ideas and answers. Like it, you know, for me, you want to journey with people long enough so that you can share some of the war stories, but also so that you can actually help better one another. You know, for me, I always say, one thing I say with our team often is, you know, we win as a team, we fail as a team. When we have a hit, you know, if one of our designers has a design that, you know, comes back and it gets knocked back by council or it's got RFI, it's like the worst thing we can do is build a culture of blame and to berate that person and say, why was that design not compliant, or why didn't we pick up that particular thing? It doesn't solve anything. All it does is belittle or berate that person. What we need to do is say, okay, how do we come up with a solution? How do we bring a solution to that problem? How do we deal with that problem? But not only that, how do we improve from it in the future? Because for me, we always grow through our mistakes. We grow through our trials and our struggles and our difficulties. We grow forward from that. And I think whereas when we build a culture of blaming others, berating others, belittling others, taking pressure off ourselves and putting it onto others, all we do is constrain relationships. We constrain forward movement. We constrain growth, because the reality is all of us get better at what we do through at times missing that opportunity or making a mistake, learning from it, growing forward from it. Whereas I've seen excellent investors and developers who've built longevity and long-term relationships with their dream team, whether that be contractors, consultants, builders, designers. They've built longevity by actually continually improving the process and going on that relationship journey of actually continuing to get better and better and better at what they do. And then, you know, along that journey, you'll learn through different mistakes that happen or different constraints that came about, some of which may have been easily handled or caused or solutioned, and some that are just out of people's hands. And by going on that journey, you constantly go on that journey of improvement and betterment and advancement into that space. And so for me, ownership builds profit. When you take ownership over your development, you will build profit. When you take ownership of the outcome over your projects, you'll build profit. Not only profit in terms of end profit on a project, but you'll build profitable relationships. You'll build profitable teams, profitable outcomes, and you can move towards highly profitable projects also from a mindset point of view. because when you're not constantly having to chop and change your team, when you've got a team that understands the culture that you've built of being solution bringers, not problem pointers, all of a sudden you have such a forward-moving team of people around you that have a mindset of moving a project forward, that we're not going to spend all of our energy and all of our time looking to blame someone. We're saying, okay, we're in this predicament. How do we get the best outcome from it? How do we come up with a solution to push forward, to move forward, to go in a direction that is able to be profitable for all parties involved so that we can continue to move from project to project to project? I think the big key thing is to stop finger pointing and to start leading the project. Last episode, I spoke about managers versus leaders. I think the big thing is in leading is often we will point fingers because we're not leading a project. We're not taking leadership on a project. So what we're looking to do is point fingers and put people in the hot seat and to put blame on people. What if we created a culture of leading projects, being project leaders rather than finger pointers? The reality is if you want to continually deplete people around you, if you want to continually churn and burn through people and not build longevity and enjoyment of relationship in the journey of doing projects, investments and developments, the best way to do that, if you want to completely burn through people, project after project, year after year, become an absolute weapon when it comes to finger pointing. Become someone who is the best blamer on the planet. Become someone who continually blames someone. It's the mortgage broker. They didn't give me the right interest rate. They gave me the finance that sunk me. It's the council's fault because they didn't approve that outcome. It's the designer's fault because they forgot to design the project with these end things in mind. It's the builder's fault because they didn't factor in these additional things. It's the agent's fault because the appraisals were wrong. If you want to become someone who will never build longevity with people, if you want to become someone who no one wants to work with, if you want to become someone who is never able to build longevity and long-term success through relationships and then get your projects to the point where they become laser focused and where they become highly profitable, where they become consistent, the best way to do that is to become the best finger pointer on the face of the planet. If you do that, I will guarantee that you will go down that path and you'll build that type of relationship. But if you want to go down the journey of building a great mindset of freedom, a mindset of having world-class people around you, having a mindset of people who are constantly having your back, who are consistently severely loyal to you and loyal to your projects and loyal to your outcomes and loyal to the goals and the vision that you have, the best way you can do that is to be a great leader who inspires and leads people. And when challenges come, you take stock of it, you deal with it. You don't cower in the corner. You don't sit there and berate and blame, but you take stock of it. You move forward, you get through that project, and then you look at how we can improve the next one. If you want to go on that journey of building that type of relationship, the best thing to do is to become a leader, to take leadership rather than becoming a chief finger pointer. The last thing is I've found that people who develop a culture of blame, they rarely learn. They rarely learn. I've seen this over the last few years, and where I've seen or worked with clients doing projects where they've got this severe culture of blame, where I've seen them blame consultants, blame builders, blame agents, blame all the different environments around them, that I've found that a lot of these people that continue to stay stuck in that rut of blame, they rarely ever learn. They don't learn because what happens is it's never their fault. And it's something I'm constantly trying to take stock of, is if we build that culture into our life of blame, we never learn, because whatever we're blaming somebody else, it's always their fault. And therefore, because it's their fault, we don't need to take any stock of it. We don't need to learn from it. Everything is on them and there's nothing on us. And although you'll be involved in projects, I've done projects where certain people in the journey have dropped the ball, whether it be someone caused a delay or something happened and different things took place. And there's a time to be firm. You need to be. Building relationships is not easy. Building a dream team is not easy, and you have to have robust conversations. You have to have strong conversations, but you need to have a mindset that you want them to grow as much as you're growing as well, because it's a give and take. Any relationship is give and take. And if you want to build the best world-class dream team of people around you, from planners, designers, consultants, through to contractors, builders, agents, stylists, you name it, everything in and around doing projects, if you want to build the most world-class group of people, you have to have robust conversations, but you also have to have loyalty and longevity. You have to have that ability to be able to grow through different things. Because the problem is, when you blame someone, then you move to the next person, and that new person hasn't had the opportunity to learn from that constraint or learn from the challenges that you overcame. And all of a sudden you just churn and burn through people. Whereas you go on that longevity journey, you journey through it, and everyone takes responsibility. First and foremost, you as the investor or the developer or someone leading that project or taking ownership of that project, you're taking responsibility, but you're within that then building a culture within your dream team where we all take responsibility. We don't point fingers. We don't blame. We're solution bringers. We take responsibility if there's a constraint or a mistake. We take stock. We take responsibility. We help deal with that. We help bring solutions and how to counteract that, or at least to mitigate some of it. And then prior to the next project, we learn from it. What could we do better? You know, if I was involved in that constraint, what can I do better? What can I improve? What can I do next time to ensure that we can improve that outcome? And all of a sudden, it raises the bar. You know, everything lifts, everything rises, everything goes forward. And because it's true, like those who blame rarely ever learn. Whereas those who take responsibility, those who take ownership and responsibility will learn so much. They'll learn quicker, they'll learn faster, and everyone will grow together. So I think it's just a key element in this industry. And, you know, to wrap up this series on mindset, and there's so many other topics we could talk about, but for me, dealing with the blame game, taking ownership of the outcome is so key and so vital in, it'll help your mindset, it'll help your team, it'll help longevity. It's like anything. The longer you work with a team, a dream team, the longer you work with people, you will understand how each other are wired. They will understand your goals, your vision, your outcomes, and you get to see sharing the success of the project. And you get to, your team will share in your success of your projects, but you'll be able to also understand that your projects are able to be contributors to the success of other people around you, whether it be their careers or their businesses or their outcomes as well. And you get to go on that longevity of building that type of relationship. And I just think it's something in our industry that could be very much improved is getting rid of the blame game, deciding that, you know what, although it may be a big culture in our industry, as someone spearheading a project, you have the opportunity to take stock and take leadership and determine that is not going to be the culture within your projects and within your developments. And it's just as simple as when the moment you see a consultant, you see a contractor, you see a builder, or you see someone in the process of your project spending so much energy and time looking to shift blame or point blame, you can just take stock. Remember, this is your project. You lead this project, and you can say something as simple as this: "Hey, we're solution bringers here. Yes, we know there's a problem, but what's the solution? Let's bring solutions to the table, because we can spend all our energy looking at who was the problem. We can spend all our energy and for what? All it's going to do is deplete something. Yes, we want a culture where people take responsibility, but we want to be solution bringers and look at, okay, this constraints happen. How can we get through this? How can we overcome this? How can we push ahead from this? And then how can we take stock in the next project? How can we learn from that element so that we can do better, we can be better, so that we can have that type of culture of learning and growing and advancing and moving forward. So look, I hope you've enjoyed this series on mindset. I'm sure it's unlocked some different questions or some different thoughts or some different constraints even in your own mindsets when it comes to doing developments, doing projects, doing investments. We're going to be doing a Q&A next month. So what I want you to do is to send any questions through via DMs on all of our socials, or if you prefer email, just email it to info@theresidentialdeveloper.com.au. Probably the easiest way is just to DM through all of our social channels. Any questions you've got, we're going to be answering some questions on mindset because for me, this is a really critical and key topic when it comes to doing projects, doing investments so that you can build and design the life in which you want to live and the way in which you want to live it. So look, I hope you've enjoyed this short episode. Be sure to share, like, subscribe, and look, we'll see you next week.